This conference is being recorded.
Good evening, everybody. Happy Valentine's Day. I'm so glad you chose, strangely, to join us this evening. We are delighted to have you. As I mentioned earlier to some of our regular folks, I am down in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and I attended a political event last night, and it really warmed my heart to get a Valentine's Day card that said, "Dear Representative, please don't break my heart by supporting the TPP." So even though we frequently don't have a lot of participation from folks in South Carolina, the progressive streak, and the labor folks, it's alive and well. So that warmed my heart. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the strategy to stop the TPP from New Zealand to the U.S. Congress. It is time for us to take action. I know we've been taking action since a lot of this June of 2013, but now we're going to ramp it up. We're going to try to be a little more strategic about what we do. I want to first make sure that everybody knows that all the audio comes over your phone or Skype, and the phone number to call and the PIN number are right on the slide. And we don't use the video because some of our participants are using dial-up, and we found out that this room works fine in dial-up as long as we don't turn on the video. So we want to be able to get as many people able to use this as we can. Our speakers tonight are Dr. Bill Rosenberg, the Policy Director and Economist from the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions, Elizabeth Swager, National Organizing Director, Citizens Trade Campaign, me, yours truly, Executive Director of People Demanding Action. I'm waving at you. Dr. Margaret Flowers, co-organizer of Plus the TPP and co-director of Popular Resistance, and our own Celeste, Trade and Globalization Policy Specialist, AFL-CIO. And I was working to get this done so quickly that I forgot to list Adam Weissman, who does so many wonderful things for us. And he will be giving us some news updates. As I said before, I'm Andrea Miller. I'm going to very quickly and very briefly go over our call norms. If anyone needs to contact me, my email address is Andrea, A-N-D-R-E-A, at peopledemandingaction.org. As I said before, our audio is phone only. You do have to call in. Again, this is so our people that are not on high-speed internet will be able to use the meeting room. We also ask that you not turn on your video camera. There's nothing I would love more than to see all your bright, smiling activist faces. But again, we want to be able to make sure as many people as possible are going to be able to use the meeting room. All calls are recorded so that if there's something that you want to hear again, if there's something that you missed because of trouble on your line, 10 minutes after we are done with this call webinar, the link to play the call recording will be available in all the places where we make the call material available for you. We are using Q&A mode to eliminate background noise. There will be several Q&A sections, and at those Q&A sections, I will ask people to press *6. That will put you in the queue, and I'll know that you want to ask a question, and I will call on you. And then we also ask that for those people making use of our chat room to please keep the chat room discussions on topic and professional. as I said before, we use the phone or Skype for the audio, and the phone number is on the slide. There is a chat room, which a lot of people are availing themselves of, and if you would like to get a copy of the PowerPoint that I am showing you, at the bottom right of the screen, below the list of all the people that are in the meeting room, is the share symbol. You will be able to download the PowerPoint from the share box. After the call, there is a link where you will be able to go to download all the assets from this call. The PowerPoint will be there. I'm going to reference some letters you can deliver to your members of Congress. They will be in that folder. The PowerPoint will be in the folder, and the link to the call recording. So a little bit later on, I will put that folder in the chat box. So every week when we do these calls, or now every other week, you can always find the information at our website, peopledemandingaction.org/downloads/TPP, and then you can click on the folder for the week of the call or the call date where you'd like to get the information. Now I'm going to introduce the team of people who help make all this possible. First is Tom Hocking, our technical advisor and our Facebook page manager. Tom runs our global TPP team Facebook page, and the page is there at the bottom of the screen. Please notice that it's facebook.com/group global TPP team. We also keep all of our materials and call assets on our Facebook page. And now we are posting YouTube videos of these calls. Also on our call planning team is Lisa Oldendorf of Move On New York. I neglected to mention that Tom is from Move On in Pennsylvania. Lisa is part of our call planning team, and she is one of our chat room hosts. Also on the call tonight is Harriet Haywood. She's the call co-organizer. She's the Florida State leader of People Demanding Action, and I've got to remember to change her slide, although there might be some upcoming events in Florida. We'll see. We also have Linda Brewster on the call planning team. Linda is with Move On in New York. Mara Cohen is on the call planning team as well. Mara is in Illinois. She works with me on PDA's mass criminalization team. She is also a popular resistance organizer. Mara worked very hard on February 4th actions all around the country with popular resistance, and she's also a global climate convergence leader in Illinois. Ann Slayton is not going to be with us tonight. She decided, I guess, on Valentine's Day, she was going to go off and attempt to have a life. We are delighted that she did that. She did, of course, put together our special meme for our Twitter storm. So for any new people on the call, every Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern, we do a Twitter storm. So if you have a Twitter account, you can log into Twitter and you can find all the tweets at https://tiny.cc/TPP Media March. And all you have to do is copy and paste your tweets into the Twitter message box, and that's all you need to know about Twitter. Our meme this week is tell the House to stop the TPP. We normally always get a lot of extra people when we share this meme. We've learned that memes that show children are very, very powerful. And that beautiful little girl is saying, I have no future because our politicians can't do their job. They are supporting people over profits, so flush the TPP. And we all on this call certainly agree with that sentiment. And now, Harriet, I'm going to have you introduce our first very special guest.
Okay, great. Our first special guest speaker tonight is joining us from New Zealand. Dr. Bill Rosenberg is the Policy Director and Economist for the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions. Bill was previously Deputy Director for the University Centre for Teaching and Learning at the University of Canterbury, a member of the Institute of Directors, a commissioner on Tertiary Education Commission, and a member of the Regional Transport Committee of Environment in Canterbury. Dr. Rosenberg is widely published on globalization, trade, and e-learning, and has been an active trade unionist for 30 years, including with the Tramway Union and Association of University Staff, where he was national president for several years. Bill holds a Bachelor's of Commerce degree in economics, a Bachelor's of Science in Mathematics, and a PhD in Mathematical Psychology. Welcome, Dr. Rosenberg.
Hello there. Great to be with you. Thanks for inviting us and making the time for me to be on this call. Can you all hear me clearly?
Loud and clear.
Yep.
Good. Thank you. So we'll have the next slide, thanks. So here you see a map of Australia and New Zealand, and first thing you will notice is that New Zealand is a small country and that it's not part of Australia, so just so you remember. Just like Canada is not part of the United States, New Zealand is not part of Australia. We've got a population of about 4.7 million and an area of about 100,000 square miles, so I see we've got Dave Felice there from Denver, Colorado. We're about the same size as Colorado, but I think we've got a lot more beaches than you have, and we've got big mountains too. So this is where Edmund Hillary did the work that led to him being one of the first people to climb Mount Everest. Capital city is Wellington, that's where I'm based. Our largest city, which we'll be coming back to, is the business capital, Auckland. Got a population of 1.4 million, about the same as San Antonio. And our indigenous people here, the tangata whenua, as they call themselves, the people of the land, are the Maori people. There's about 600,000 out of our population who are Maori, and we'll be coming back to that. Next slide, please. So here are people marching through the streets of Wellington, where I live. You'll notice that here we call it the TPPA, or at least the people who want a TPPA-free New Zealand call it the TPPA rather than the TPP, and that's because we don't think that it's any kind of partnership. We wanted to take the emphasis off the partnership, and it's interesting to see how much that's been taken up in the media as the strength of the campaign has progressed. How many of them call it TPPA as opposed to TPP? But here you see this march through Wellington, and you'll see people from political parties, from unions, from all walks of life, people, kids in pushchairs and mums and dads and all the rest. So next slide, please. So the opposition to the TPPA hasn't come from nowhere. It's been growing over several years, and indeed has grown out of protests over a large number of years about various aspects of these kinds of agreements and further back too. It's a broad coalition of groups. It's grown bigger and bigger as it's gone on. We've got Maori, we've got unions, health professionals have been a very important part of it, doctors, nurses, academics. We've got writers, we've got artists, and so it goes on. It's a very strong cross-section which the government doesn't like to acknowledge. It now includes all our opposition parties in Parliament. We have a proportional representation system, a bit like Germany's, and so we have many parliamentary parties, but all the opposition ones are now quite strongly against the TPPA. Most recently, the Labour Party, the main opposition party, came out strongly against it and said that the next election would be a referendum on the TPPA. This breaks a historical bipartisan view of these kinds of agreement, that both the Labour Party and the ruling National Party back these kinds of agreements. And this has been a very big break, particularly for Labour and for New Zealand. And it's a great step forward from our point of view. Also, another party that is against the TPPA is part of the government coalition, and that is the Māori Party. And again, we'll come back to the Māori later, but the Māori Party, which has joined with the National Party to the concern of some people, has a very strong position against the TPPA. We've got not so much part of the people who go out there marching, but there are a number of organisations too who've formed their own coalition, the Fair Deal Coalition, opposing the TPPA. Consuming New Zealand, which is a non-governmental organisation representing consumer interests. Internet New Zealand. There's some very innovative software companies with their own organisation, NZ Rise. Librarians, lawyers. Even the Chief Justice here has made a speech expressing some concerns. We've got the great benefit here of the knowledge of Professor Jane Kelsey, who some of you might have come across. Jane is a great treasure. She's a scholar, great scholar, she's an activist, she's a former union president, and she has deep ties to Māori. National coordination in New Zealand is through a campaign called, an organisation called It's Our Future, and you can find their website, it's itsourfuture.org.nz. And we've had big marches growing in size over the last couple of years, 2014-15, up to 25,000 people in 20 more centres around the country, ranging from big marches in Auckland and Wellington down to just a handful of people outside their Member of Parliament's office or something like that in small centres. So a very big range there. And there's a very good campaign going too, asking local governments, local city councils and all the rest, and to pass resolutions of concern about the TPPA. And the ones that have passed these resolutions now cover well over 60% of New Zealand's population. Next slide, please. So, to the 4th of February, the signing. There were strong actions the weekend before it in several centres, and they range from tiny town of Raglan, where hundreds of people, about 20% of the population, jumped from the Raglan footbridge. Now, this doesn't jump onto hard tarmac or something, it jumps into a river in a chain bomb. So it's one of the pastimes of Raglan, jumping off this bridge. But you can see it if you get hold of these slides and click on that link there. It's quite cute, watching these people, and there's lots of the population there watching them jump in as a protest against the TPPA. We had car enthusiasts, or petrol heads as we call them here, cars against the TPPA driving to their local airports. And we had protests in a lot of other centres as well, including in the capital, Wellington, where there was a petition delivered to the representative of the Queen in New Zealand, the Governor-General. Thank you. Next one. In Auckland, then on the day of the signing, the 4th of February, and this is probably what you've seen if you've seen anything in your international media coverage. 15,000 people marched down Auckland's main street, Queen Street. They were led by kapa haka groups and elders, Māori kapa haka groups and elders. Kapa haka is, you might have heard of the haka that our football teams, the All Blacks and so on, do before playing a game. it's a war dance. But the kapa haka groups not only do that, but they sing, they dance. They are the cultural representatives of Māori, and we'll come back to them in a minute. The kapa haka groups and elders led the march. There were leaders of unions at the front, non-governmental organisations of many kinds, and political parties were represented. Not only was this large march, which was designed to be family-free and had a wide representation of the population there, with people coming from all around New Zealand, there were non-violent sit-downs on motorway ramps that in the end blocked the city centre, the central city. There were pickets around the signing venue, which was, I think, very symbolically for this kind of agreement, which encourages the casino economy. The pickets were around the signing venue, which was the Auckland Casino, and we heard from people who were inside, from journalists and others, that they looked outside and they thought, boy, those people out there are well organised. And the media really took this seriously, partly, I guess, because there were all these trade ministers there for the signing, but partly because there was such an enormous event and there were big build-ups to it. So there were reporters out interviewing anyone in sight. Some of them were friendly, some not so friendly, and there was saturation coverage on all national media with
Bill. I hope we didn't lose Bill. I'm checking on the board. Bill may have dropped off. He will hopefully call back in. Bill, we may need you to call back in at this point. We can't hear you. All right, anybody else? Is it just me?
It's not just you. You can't hear him.
No, he's gone.
All right, yeah. Bill has dropped off. He'll be calling back in momentarily. He's just officially dropped off. All right. He'll call us back momentarily. It may take him a little while to call back in. He's got a lot of numbers to call the U.S. from Australia. But we did pretty good for a while there. Yeah, we were doing too good. It was almost too good a dream come true. He connected with no problem. All right, let's see. I think Bill might have had just one more slide. Let me double check. Let me see. Well, we did want to do our Q&A.
Hello there, Bill back again.
There you are. Wonderful.
Awesome.
We knew you'd be back.
So where was I up to?
We're up to the Auckland March.
Led by Maori, is that slide, or did you...
Yes, that's the slide, the Auckland March led by the Maori. And it's
Okay.
an incredible slide.
So what we have here is the Auckland March being led by Maori, and there you'll see the Maori kapa haka group, the warriors dressed in traditional dress. Behind you may see may be able to see some of the Maori elders, the kaumātua, the men, and the queer, the women, leading the march, and behind them, of course, the huge march moving up the main street of Auckland, Queen Street. So can we have the next slide? So just to describe to you how this comes about, that Māori are so concerned. On just 176 years ago, almost to the day of the signing, on the 6th of February 1840, a treaty was signed at Waitangi, north of Auckland, between the Māori chiefs, the Rangatira, and representatives of the British colonial administration giving Maori sovereignty or rangatiratanga over their land and their possessions, subject to governance by the British Crown. This is the Treaty of Waitangi, the Tiriti o Waitangi in Maori. Now, after it was signed, it was for many years, for a century, it was ignored, and Maori were dispossessed of their land and were considered by Pakeha, by the European settlers, as almost a dying race. During the 20th century, however, the Maori resistance, if you like, grew, and 40 years ago there was legal recognition of the treaty, and this began a process of treaty settlements to Maori iwi, or tribes, where they were allowed to have their grievances heard before a special tribunal, and they were awarded significant sums of money, probably nowhere near what they had lost, but significant sums of money and land in recognition of the dispossession. And associated with this was a regrowth of Maori culture, confidence and demands for sovereignty. They now see the TPPA as an attack on that sovereignty. Even though there is a special Treaty of Waitangi clause in the agreement, it depends on the government taking that, recognising that issues are a Treaty of Waitangi issue, and they don't trust the government to defend them and to defend their sovereignty because of their experiences of past actions of New Zealand governments. So, right across Māoridom, there is this feeling that the TPPA is an attack on their sovereignty and on New Zealand's sovereignty. But symbolically, there is always the following action took place. For any guests, such as the trade ministers, there is always a Māori welcome or pōwhiri given to guests. This is a big thing. It's usually at least 40 or 50 people from iwi or kapahaka groups giving a traditional Māori welcome to the visitors. However, in this case, almost all Auckland iwi tribes and kapahaka groups refused to give this pōwhiri, to give this welcome. And in the end, they could only find 3 or 4 people who did it for the trade ministers. So this was a very symbolic affront, if you like, rebuttal to the visiting trade ministers about how much they were welcome to New Zealand for this signing. The TPPA was a big issue for the annual treaty celebrations, which occur on the 6th of February, just 2 days later, at Waitangi. And in the end, the opposition was so great that the Prime Minister, who almost always attends these celebrations, refused to go to Waitangi. Next slide, please. How am I going for time here?
You're doing just fine.
Good. So where to now in New Zealand? So government and business leaders were shocked at the degree and intensity and actually the breadth of the opposition. They're now regrouping. They're starting to marshal their forces, attacking the opposition to the agreement as dumb people who don't understand, who are being misled. They're trying to woo Māori by saying that the agriculture interests that they have will benefit from the TPPA. Some Māori may be bought into that, many of them will not be. They're starting a national roadshow to soft sell the agreement, particularly aimed at business. The ratification process is already beginning with parliamentary hearings. First of all, they've called for submissions for an initial so-called examination of the agreement, which is a powerless piece of action that they go through that has gives Parliament no power to change or influence the agreement. And then they have to introduce the implementing legislation that is required to bring the TPPA into effect in New Zealand. That will happen later this year with an omnibus bill. doubtless calculated to make it as difficult for the opposition parties to oppose it. And there will be ratification by Cabinet. In New Zealand, like in Australia, the ratification is by Cabinet, not by Parliament itself. In the end, they could actually ratify even if the legislation isn't passed, but the convention here is that they do pass the legislation first. They have a majority, so almost certainly they'll be able to do that. But when they actually ratify is not quite clear yet. How it will be in relation to the ratification in the United States is not clear. Next slide, please. I was asked to speak about international union cooperation. There was a rather exaggerated statement there about how New Zealand was leading this, where they were leading the opposition. Well, that's a bit of an exaggeration. We certainly have been very happy participants in this. There are many existing international union relationships that have been very helpful in this. We have good relationships with the Australian Council of Trade Unions, with the AFL-CIO, and with CLC in Canada. The International Trade Union Confederation and its TPP affiliates has, over the period of the negotiations, organised phone link-ups, been regulars from AFL-CIO, Australian Council of Trade Unions and ourselves. We've met together at some negotiating rounds and together lobbied negotiators, made joint statements and we put out leaflets. We've developed a model labour chapter based on the US model, but strengthened it considerably based on the experience of United States unions. We've issued statements opposing the final TPA, well, the ITUC has issued a statement opposing the final TPPA, and it's issued an analysis of the final labour chapter showing how far it falls short. It has supported an online petition of New Zealand unions about the time of the signing on the 4th of February, and is currently considering a campaign involving parliamentarians against the TPPA around the TPPA countries. Around the 4th of February signing, other than in the United States, which you know about, and in New Zealand, they included the Australian Council of Trade Unions and signed a joint letter to MPs and a press conference along with a lot of other non-governmental organisations opposed to the TPPA. In Canada, the CLC put out a statement and declared the first week of February lobbying week about it. And in Mexico, the UNT co-organised an international forum. Next slide. Thanks. So, just to finish up, thank you all who are listening for your fantastic hard work. We're watching with awe from afar the closeness of the vote over the Trade Promotion Authority, and of course the quite extraordinary election you've got going on at the moment with, I'm told, all the candidates who are attracting more than 5% in the polls opposed to the TPPA one way or another. Of course, you will be wanting to make sure that they keep honest to that, and to make sure that the people who are elected to Congress are also against the TPPA. So congratulations on your successes so far. We count on you. Let me just explain. We count on you because it is very likely that the government here, despite the strong opposition, will push this through. The opposition Labour Party has said that the next general election, which is in 2017, will be a referendum on membership of the TPPA. So there's some hope that if it's not ratified, it's not implemented by then, that we could still pull out of it. But even some sceptics are being pulled towards the very weak argument that if it is there, we can't afford not to be in it. New Zealand cannot afford not to be in it. And so there will be, for us, by far the easiest option, if you like, is it is never implemented. By far the best way for us is if you defeat it. So, as I say, we count on you. All the best, and thank you very much for listening.
Well, thank you very much, Bill. And Bill, hopefully you can stay with us for and answer a couple of questions.
Sure.
All right, lovely. If you have a question for Bill, press *6 on your phone, and that will put you in the question queue. *6 to ask a question. All right. Paul Lansford, your line's open. Go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Dillon. Thank you so much for this presentation. Looking at the slide, plus during February 4th and watching the actions, I'm just very impressed. And I've been part of actions here in the United States, and one in particular this past November, and it was also, I mean, we did manage to own the street, but we did not have as nearly as many people show up. And I'm just wondering why you might think that you were so much more successful getting so many people from New Zealand to be so passionate and to shut things down as compared to the U.S. effort, even though the U.S. effort did almost defeat fast track.
It's a interesting question, isn't it? It's, in a way, it's hard to answer, but I think it does lie in the fact that this consciousness has been building up over a period of years. Some of it goes back right to the Uruguay round of the World Trade that formed the World Trade Organization. But some of you may remember the multilateral agreement on investment, which had widespread international opposition. So there's been a building awareness of what lies behind these agreements, that they're not simply about trade and goods, and that there's much more to it. I think also for a small country, and particularly for a small country in which Maori are a really important and growing part of our society, growing in importance, that the issues of sovereignty are very much in people's minds, the feeling that we must retain that independence to make our own laws and make our own way in the world, and people feel very insulted when they see things, particularly like ISDS and so on, that will clearly undermine that sovereignty. So I think it's partly our history, and partly it's a lot of educational work that has gone on over a period of quite a long time.
All right, thank you. Our next question, it looks like it's area code 815.
It is. I had a question. You said, Dr. Bill, by the way, I'm very impressed with your country and your people, too. So you guys are doing a much better job, I think. But anyway, they're trying to break down the Maori. You know what? Is there some way for us to contact groups? Do you have, like, tweets or Facebooks? Because I would just like to, on occasion, say to the people in New Zealand, don't trust them. Don't even trust the United States government. Just hang in there and be tough, because nobody here is trustworthy. I don't how there's hardly anybody in our government that we can trust. So surely you shouldn't trust the big leaders. So I would just like to say that to them sometimes, so they realize they're doing the right thing by fighting back. Okay. So how can we contact them?
Yeah, thank you. Look, probably your best bet is to go to the itsourfuture.org.nz, or NZ as you put it, NZ website, which is the website for the organising campaign, and you'll find some contact details there. I'm not quite sure what kind of communication you want to do, but that would certainly enable you to get to the groups that are connected with It's Our Future. Is that a good enough answer?
I allow people to ask a question, and then I clear them out of the queue. I put the website in, so thank you very, very much. Nancy Price, go ahead. Nancy? Nancy, your line should be open. All right, I'm going to go on to the next caller. Nancy may have self-muted. You're showing up as Don Gellert.
Hi, actually Sally. It's my dad's phone. Anyway, we're just discussing how do you turn out 15,000 people if you don't have a national media or if your national media is as bad and hiding stuff the way it is in the United States. We've been we did a couple of good actions in November. We've done a few small actions, but nothing on that scale. So what's the secret? Check.
Well, we have lots of networks, email and Facebook. I see someone's put up a Facebook group, a link to a Facebook group for the TPP action group. There's networks within towns. There's local organized. One of the things that's been really inspiring is that there have been action groups set up in all these towns that have taken part, and they haven't just come and gone. They've kept on going, and so it's built its own momentum. And I've been really thrilled at seeing these groups grow and mature and discuss amongst themselves, the best actions to take and take very mature decisions about that are effective, but won't put off the rest of New Zealand. So it's been very disciplined but very effective. There's a lot of use of our own social media and email systems and so on, and that's been, I think, part of it. I guess there has been some publicity from the media, but that has been in many ways subsidiary to what we've been able to do ourselves.
All right, Nancy, let's try it again.
Hello, do you hear me now?
Hello.
We hear you now.
Okay, very sorry. Hello, Mr. Rosenberg. Thank you for all you're doing there in New Zealand. And I just wanted to say hello because I've been reaching out to a lot of your groups there to get
You there? Not hearing?
We're not hearing you, Nancy. You've been reaching out to the groups to get eat free zones. Nancy, you're going to need to try again. So
hello, this is Nancy.
There you go. All right.
I'm so sorry. I wanted to ask Mr. Rosenberg, I've been working here in the U.S. on TPP free zone resolutions by cities and counties, and we've got a pretty good campaign going on, and I've been reaching out to your folks there in New Zealand. So I wanted to ask you if that's having any particular impact. And then my second question is, the USTR and other administration officials are now coming to speak on campuses. So, for example, one administration official is coming here to UC Davis, University of California, Davis, in March, and I think mid-February, the USTR himself, Froman, is going to be at Stanford University. So there now seems to be a real effort to reach out to students on campus and sort of give them the, give them the speech. So I just wondered if that's happening in New Zealand now.
Thanks, Nancy. The local government campaign has been a very strong one. I'll just give you a little bit of background here. I noticed that someone was sent in a message there talking about our opposition to nuclear warships and so on under Reagan. The nuclear-free New Zealand is a great part of our history that is supported right across the spectrum. And so this idea of nuclear-free, TPPA-free, which really resonates with people. many local governments in New Zealand became nuclear-free under the campaigning that built up to us becoming a nuclear-free country. And so this is a parallel, and it's something people understand here. There's been one wonderful campaigner who has been going round progressively around all the local governments in New Zealand with a standard resolution, a 10 or 12-point resolution, which local governments have essentially signed up to, expressing their concern. And when the text was released, they called on Local Government New Zealand, which is the peak body for local government, to do an impact report on local government. So given that it now covers all our biggest cities and a number of provincial centres as well, it has very broad coverage, and from everything we hear, the government is very upset by it. It finds it quite extraordinary, but there's very little it can do about it. So I think it has quite a marked effect in just raising people's awareness of these issues, drawing in local activists, and making it a countrywide issue. On the USTR, speaking of campuses, the government, as I mentioned, is just starting a national tour to sell the TPPA to New Zealand. So far, they seem to be addressing it mainly at business audiences. We haven't yet seen whether or not they will try other places like campuses. It's not at all impossible. We're still thinking about how we respond to these, whether we packet them outside, whether we go inside and ask questions, or whatever. But I think they are very useful opportunities to raise all the issues, either by asking tricky questions, and questions that address the heart of the issue, and for demonstrations to raise people's awareness.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rosenberg. We are at the end of time for questions. We do have other speakers. Thank you so very, very much. Harriet, if you would be kind enough to introduce our next guest. Oh, yes, please.
Okay.
I want you to introduce Margaret tonight.
Okie dokie, no problem. Dr. Margaret Flowers is a pediatrician, and she is the co-chair of the Maryland chapter of the Physicians for a National Health Program. She is also co-director of Popular Resistance and It's Our Economy, and co-organizer of Flush the TPP at flushthetpp.org. Thank you. Margaret, you're on.
Great. Thank you so much, Harriet. And it was great to hear you, Bill. Thanks for being on the call tonight and for everyone that's here. So you heard some of what happened in New Zealand, and we were really enjoyed watching what was coming out over Twitter, following the actions that were going on there, and videos. In the United States and 5 other countries, there were also actions around the signing of the TPP. We had about 40 cities here in the U.S. that took action, and so if you look on the slide, you'll see some of the photos from some of those cities, and if we can go to the next slide, you'll see even more photos from other cities. Some of the actions were going to members of Congress's offices, some were marches, shutting down streets. One went to the Consulate of New Zealand in New York. Some were nighttime actions with projections of messages on buildings and lights. And somewhere in a couple of places, the actions were 1 or 2 people that got out there in a visible place and held up some signs and passed out flyers. But people did something, and that was really fantastic. And so what we're hearing now, coming out of the signing, instead of a lot of, well, one, there really wasn't very much coverage in the commercial media at all here in the United States. But because of all the actions that went on around the world, the message that came out was not, hooray, this is great, the TPP is signed. It was like, TPP was signed, and there was a lot of opposition to it, which is great. And just this past week, we're hearing murmurs from Paul Ryan in the House, from Mitch McConnell, that they really don't think the votes are there right now to pass the TPP. Some questions still if this will get pushed off to the lame duck session in November, December. But of course, we have to continue to keep our eye on what's going on and not let back on our pressure, because we know that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and all the big corporations and the Obama administration very much would like to get this passed through. So I think that our actions are having an impact, and that means that we need to continue to build. So let's go to the next slide. And so this week, members of Congress are going to be home in their home districts, and people are organizing actions to go to their members of Congress's office. Now, if your member has come out in opposition to the TPP, this would be a good time, if they're not already doing more, speaking out about it, or speaking to their other colleagues, to meet with them and find out things that they would be willing to do to step up. Just on Friday in Baltimore, college students with the Real Food Challenge did a march to Congressman Elijah Cummings' office and thanked him for his stated opposition to the TPP, but asked him to do more, such as writing a letter to the rest of the Maryland delegation members of Congress, encouraging them also to sign on and come out publicly and strongly against the TPP. And so they're going to keep pressuring Congressman Cummings to do that letter. If your member has not taken a position, really push on them to take a position. If they haven't read it, ask them to read it and justify to you why they haven't taken a position yet. And then if they are for the TPP or against what we want, if they're TPP proponents, it's great to target them and protest outside of their office and see if you can get them to switch, as some members of Congress have done. So this week is a great time for that. Some people are doing Valentine's-themed actions and doing things like break up with the TPP. So it's just something to think about for this week. As far as upcoming mobilizations, on our last Wednesday night call for the TPP resistance, we had Evan Greer from Fight for the Future come on, and she talked about a mobilization that they're hoping to plan this spring that combines bringing well-known musicians into major cities that are pivotal in this fight, doing a educational awareness and concert event, then a direct action training, followed by a direct action, and hopefully leaving behind some infrastructure that can continue to take action. So we'll continue to work with her on that and try to make it happen, and we'll be building the resistance in the meantime anyway. So if you want to join those Wednesday calls, go to flushthetpp.org to the news section, and you'll see the top post has information about where you can register for the Wednesday night calls. They're at 9 p.m. Eastern and 6 p.m. Pacific. So we look forward to seeing you on those calls as well. And if you have actions that you want to share with us, we're having some trouble with our action map form and TPP things going into my spam box. So just send a notification to me directly at info@popularresistance.org. We'll put your actions up on the map and promote them. And as always, if you can take pictures and write a short summary of what happened, we'll share that as well, because people really love to see those pictures and hear what people are doing in other parts of the country. So let's continue to build this resistance, build this pressure over the year, and let's stop the TPP. Thanks.
Thank you, Margaret. Harriet, if you please.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, Margaret. I just hope you'll stick around for some Q&A after Elizabeth. The two of you can have a shared Q&A. And
sure.
Our next guest speaker is Elizabeth Swager. She is the organizing director of Citizens Trade Campaign, a national coalition of labor, environmental, and human rights organizations working together to stop NAFTA-style free trade agreements. Elizabeth's background includes directing the Oregon Fair Trade Campaign, a state affiliate of Citizens Trade Campaign. Also directing Sweat-Free Northwest, where she led some of the most successful sweatshop-free public procurement campaigns in the nation, and spearheading a successful union organizing drive and the first contract campaign with her co-workers at a previous employer, Free Geek in Portland. And they are currently represented by CWA. So Take it away, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Harriet. It's a pleasure to be on the call with you tonight, and thank you for all of the incredible work you're doing to stop the TPP. As was mentioned, I work for Citizen Trade Campaign. We're a national coalition of labor, environment, and human rights and other civil society groups. We were founded in 1992 in reaction to the now detrimental North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. Our coalition is united in a common belief that international trade and investment must be used not just to move goods around the globe, but to achieve societal goals such as economic justice, human rights, healthy communities, and a sound environment. The rules which govern global economy really need to reflect the views and the needs of the majority of the world's people on issues like jobs, wages, the environment, human rights, food and consumer safety, access to medicines, and public health. CTC is a national leader in the fight for international trade policy that better serves the interests of the majority of people rather than the agenda of multinational corporations. And for years now, we've been focused on stopping the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We can go to the next slide. Recently, Citizen Trade Campaign has organized more than 1,550 groups to urge Congress to oppose the TPP, a joint letter. This was done shortly after the TPP text was released. After years of secret negotiations, the released text unveiled exactly what would be expected from a trade agreement that has been negotiated behind closed doors with the help of hundreds of corporations. The opposition to the TPP in this letter was broad and varied. Unions and labor allies are outraged by the TPP's grossly inadequate labor standards and corporate favoring provisions that threaten to further offshore good-paying jobs and drive down wages. The TPP's investor protections reduce the risk and cost of moving production to low-wage countries, which of course incentivizes offshoring to TPP countries, many of which have egregious labor and human rights records. Even if the labor standards, however, were much, much stronger, the TPP is so poorly negotiated that it allows products assembled in many parts manufacturers in third-party countries like China, for example, with no TPP obligations whatsoever to enter into the U.S. duty-free. Many of our environmental allies strongly oppose the TPP because of the environmental chapter that rolls back the incredibly modest progress that was made in free trade agreements negotiated under the Bush administration, allowing countries to violate their obligations in key environmental treaties in order to boost trade and investment without any consequences. So it's as if these negotiators had planned to move to another country after the TPP, to move to another planet, rather, after the TPP goes into effect. Despite the fact that the TPP would threaten climate policies, increase shipping emissions, and shift manufacturing to more carbon-intensive countries, the TPP fails to even include the words climate change. Many groups concerned about the TPP's impact on family farms signed on to the letter in part because the TPP makes it easier to import less safe foods and undercut the price of local food producers because they're subsidized by grueling working conditions and a lack of safety regulations. There's now new language in the final text that requires border inspectors to notify exporters for every food safety check that finds there's an issue, there's a problem, and give the exporter the right to bring a challenge to the port inspection. So this second guessing of U.S. food inspectors creates a chilling effect that would deter rigorous oversight of imported food. Many of the TPP's intellectual property provisions would effectively delay the introduction of low-cost generic medications, increasing healthcare prices and reducing access to medicine both here at home and abroad. This is, of course, a huge concern to HIV rights advocates, consumer groups, and many others who signed on to the letter. The TPP's investor to state dispute settlement system, ISDS, is of course an incredible concern to many. It would enable foreign investors to challenge bedrock environmental and public health laws as violations of the TPP's broad foreign investor rights in these international tribunals that circumvent domestic judicial systems. This is clearly a threat both here in the U.S. and throughout the Pacific Rim. Next slide, please. So earlier this year, many trade justice activists across the country, in fact, many of you on the call tonight, delivered this letter to members of Congress with a clear message. The TPP text is out. The time for fence sitting is over, and we need our members of Congress to publicly oppose the TPP. I imagine many of you on the call had been hearing from your member of Congress for years probably that they were not willing to make a decision until the text is complete. Since we already knew for many years that this terrible deal was heading in the wrong direction, thanks to the many eye-opening leaked chapters that groups like WikiLeaks released, our members not having a stance on the TPP was really hard to accept even back then. Well, now the TPP text has been released, and it's worse than we thought in many respects. So there's really no excuse for fence-sitting at this point. We need our members of Congress to stand up for people on the planet and publicly oppose the TPP. So now is the time to ensure that our most vulnerable families and communities don't bear the brunt of the TPP's many risks. Under fast-track authority, which barely passed last year, Congress is not able to amend the agreement without rejecting it entirely. So that's exactly what we need our members of Congress to do. Before we go into how we can encourage our representatives to oppose the TPP, I want to go over just very quickly what we're looking at for the timeline on the TPP. Next slide, please. So as all of you know, the TPP was signed by the United States and 11 other countries earlier this month. Now, the good news is that the signing of the TPP is not the same thing as being ratified by Congress. It still needs to go for a vote in the House and the Senate. Fast-track authority gives the president the power to decide when the TPP implementing legislation is introduced, so not Congress. And he has made it very clear that getting the TPP passed is a top priority in 2016. Now, that being said, the administration is not going to introduce the TPP implementing legislation until they're sure that the votes are there. If it were to be introduced, it needs to be voted on within 90 days. The average is 28 days, but it could drag on outside of that. Likely, the soonest that it could be introduced is just after Super Tuesday, March 1st. But again, the TPP will not be introduced if the votes aren't there. If we put enough pressure on our congressional members, the entire thing can still be derailed. And that's where all of you come in and have come in for some time. So our goal is to keep the TPP from ever hitting the floor of Congress by getting congressional leaders to publicly oppose the deal. Because of the good work of folks like all of you on the call tonight, we've already made the TPP a top political issue. And as Bill Rosenberg mentioned earlier on the call, all leading presidential candidates from both parties are repeatedly speaking out against the TPP. And as a result of our public outcry, many see the TPP as already dead on arrival this year. But we are not in the clear yet. We need to continue putting the pressure on our elected officials who still have not come out, as Margaret mentioned. And here's just a few ideas on how we can do that. Next slide, please. So we have a great opportunity in the congressional recess, both current one and upcoming. Members are currently at home for President's Day of recess, which is happening now until February 22nd. This is a great time to bird dog at town hall meetings, go to fundraisers and other events that your congressional reps are attending. Asking your rep to oppose the TPP at every event possible is often what pushes them to come out with their position. And I imagine many of you have already put in meeting requests to meet with your member of Congress. Sometimes I know it can be hard to get that date set, and it takes a lot of follow-up. Some of our allies are using this recess as an opportunity to get that meeting scheduled for the next recess, March 4th through 13th. And they're doing that by dropping by the congressional district offices and politely requesting a meeting for the March recess or earliest available time slot. So for those of you who did not already have an organized meeting to deliver the organizational sign-on letter opposing the TPP that I spoke about earlier, this recess could be a good time to just drop by and bring your member of Congress, the letter. It's a great way of showing the diverse constituencies that oppose this trade deal. And then just to add on to some of the actions that Margaret mentioned, in Washington on Wednesday, February 17th, the Washington Fair Trade Coalition is inviting people in the area to join the Rebel Alliance to defeat the TPP Death Star. So they're doing a really creative Star Wars themed march in Street Theater outside of Rep. Kilmer's Tacoma office at noon. And then they'll also be doing another one in Olympia Thursday, February 18th at 1 o'clock in front of the Capitol building. So if you're in Washington and can make that, please do join them. It sounds like a really fun action. Then tomorrow, Monday the 15th, President Obama is hosting leaders from throughout Southeast Asia in Southern California to talk in part about how to ratify and expand the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Citizen Trade Campaign's new California staff, Lua Masumi, is organizing a powerful protest outside of the ASEAN Summit in Rancho Mirage, California, where these leaders will be discussing how the TPP can be both implemented and push other countries to join. Protesters are going to be there banging drums, chanting, and they'll have a giant globe that reads "United Against the TPP," and hopefully we'll get some great media out of that as well. So if you're in the area, please do join that. And then finally, this week in Oregon and Pennsylvania, we're delivering the same Valentine's card that Andrea saw in South Carolina today. The Valentine's message to our members is, please don't break our hearts, oppose the TPP. Now, this is something that's really fun and relatively easy to do. So if any of our listeners are inclined to do so, drop by the office with your own Valentine card. Just want to remind people tomorrow's President's Day, so offices will be closed, but Tuesday or maybe later in the week are a possibility. And if anyone on the call would like me to put you in touch with the organizers of any of these events, please email me at elizabeth@citizentrade.org. And those are a few ideas of some of the actions that you can take to keep up the pressure. I'm sure many of you have other powerful, creative ideas and actions to build momentum. And I'd love to hear them if people are willing to share. And then I just end by saying, if we all do our part and work together, we can win this thing. So thank you so much for having me on the call.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. What I'm going to do now is
Q&A session is over.
I'm going to clear the queue.
Q&A session started.
And then I'm going to open it up again. And I'm only going to take a couple of questions because now we're running a little bit late. So if anyone has a question for Margaret or Elizabeth, press *6. And I'm going to need your question. All right, I've got a question. It looks like it is a Denver number. It looks like it's 303. Go ahead.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi, this is April in Denver, and I'm just curious about the timeline, so either of you can answer this probably. As far as the lame duck session, like, what does that mean? It means that they can vote without a Congress, or, like, I heard someone talking about it, and it sounded sketchy, so will you explain just kind of what we can do, or is that good for us, or not? That's all.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Okay. Yeah, so lame duck is after the election period, and we have a lot of leverage at this point while, we got the presidential elections happening. And local, and keep in mind local elections coming up as well. But during this time we do have a lot of leverage because we can get candidates like we've been able to successfully do to speak out against the TPP and make a commitment to opposing it. After that time, it's a lot harder. And Margaret, anything you would like to add would be great too.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so the lame duck period technically is, beginning in November, right after the elections, up until the December break, which is usually like the third week of December, and that's typically a time when Congress, that time of year anyway, is a time when members of Congress try to sneak things through because most people are really getting consumed with the holidays and not paying attention to what's going on. But it's particularly bad after an election because members of Congress that have lost their seats don't have anything to lose, so they can vote, however they want to vote for their corporate funders, and hopefully they'll get some corporate deal out of that when they leave. So that's kind of a period when bad things are tried to be pushed through, and so it's something we have to be really vigilant about. And I think McConnell was signaling that whether they go to lame duck or move it to 2017 depends a lot on who is elected as the next president, as there is still some desire to get an even better deal for some of the corporate interests than the one we already have. And I just quickly wanted to add, because it's so easy for people to forget that there is more than two parties in this country, that there is a Green Party presidential candidate, Dr. Jill Stein, who is also opposed to the TPP. Thanks.
Thank you, Margaret and Elizabeth. Our next question, it looks like it is area code 713. You're showing up as child builders. Your line's open. I think they may have self-muted. And I just missed. All right. The next question, child builders, press *6 again. I misclicked and dropped you out of the queue. I'm clicking to try to let you ask a question, and it's just taking you out of the queue. So child builders, press star 6. I'm going to try that again. I'm not sure why you just disappeared out of the queue. I'll do it manually. I won't use my button. All right, let's try this. This is caller at area code 212.
Good evening. My name is Catherine Skopik. I'm calling from New York City, and I wasn't able to join at the very beginning, so you very well may have touched upon this. So forgive me if I'm causing a repetition. I understand that in terms of who we're going to focus on, that it is now the House of Representatives, since the President and the Senate are probably not going to help us out with this effort. So I just wanted to know if you could confirm that. And secondly, how we can get the candidates to talk more about it.
Yes, that is absolutely right. It is going to be in the House where we win this battle on the TPP. And so most of our focus has been congressional targets in the House. And the way that we get candidates to speak out is often through candidate questionnaires. So unions often will do candidate questionnaires, and I imagine that a lot of environmental groups do them as well. But we do have some states that are working on questionnaires just talking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Because if you can get your candidates to answer in writing, it's a lot easier to hold them accountable when they do get into office. So I would encourage listeners, to reach out to your unions or other organizations and try and get some candidate questionnaires going. But time is kind of short; it has to happen quick.
Thank you very much. Any organization that has a political action committee that potentially can endorse candidates. I know the Political Action Committee, Progressive Democrats of America, they have the TPP in their candidate questionnaire. But again, most of the questionnaires have already been done. And remember, members in the House have to run for office every 2 years. Members in the Senate run only every 6 years. That's why we're putting all the pressure on the House. What we're going to do now is I'm going to walk you through the offices where we currently have congressional visits scheduled that we know about. There's about 36 congressional visits that are set up. Some are Senate, most are House. Looking in the map, you can see we are missing and desperately in need of congressional visits in the southern states, in the western states, and in the Midwest. I'm going to drop in the link where if you are scheduling a congressional visit and you want us to recruit and see if we can get other folks to join you, just go and enter your event on the link that I just dropped in the chat room. Because one of the things that I do is I spend a good deal of my time on Capitol Hill talking to legislators and asking them to support or oppose something. I'm doing a very, very brief tutorial on what that can look like. Whenever you go on a congressional visit or visit any elected official, it's really important that you have an ask. And it's also important that you have your ask written down. So for more than 3 years, PDA and now PD Action, we've been delivering letters. So we've already written a letter opposing the TPP on that site that I just dropped in the chat box. You can go, you can schedule your event, you can then download the letter. for either the House or the Senate, whichever one you need, print the letter, sign it, have your friends and neighbors sign it, and then go and deliver the letter. When you're talking to elected officials, understand that one of their primary goals is to get reelected again. So when you talk to them about your issue, tell them why this issue is going to either A, win them votes, or B, lose them votes. And then make sure that the people you talk to, especially if you're talking staffers, and normally you will, that they have a very clear idea of what you said, which is why it's so important to have it all written down. When you set up a meeting, you're going to need to make an official request in writing and follow up with a phone call. Most offices, or virtually all offices, have a person on staff that has been designated to be the scheduler. So it is their job to schedule appointments with constituents coming in to see either staff or the member. Now, when we visit on Capitol Hill, because we visit 50 to 150 offices in one day, we don't make appointments. When you're going to a district office, you're going to want to make your appointment. Now, for people who ask us for them, we have 1.5 million petition signatures opposing the TPP, and I'm currently organizing them into state and into congressional districts. So if you want the count of how many people oppose the TPP that signed a petition from your state or your district, let me know, and I will be able to get you those numbers. Now, who should attend? A meeting in a congressional office isn't exactly a protest. When you're doing a protest, you want as many people as you can get. When you're going to visit a congressional office and you want to sit down with a staffer, 3 to 5 people is ideal. It's perfect if you can bring a diverse constituency, different age, different races. It's always great to bring a religious faith leader, because all electeds know that people that are faith leaders generally have a very large number of people that they can influence. Be early for your appointment. Look presentable. You are not going out to an amusement park. And if you've never done it before and you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable about it, nothing to be uncomfortable about. They're people. They've just managed to get themselves elected. They're very good at raising money. That's the only way they're different from you. You might want to practice and role play. Now, when you get there, especially if there's a group of you, know who's going to be the facilitator. Are there going to be people telling stories about how this impacts them and or other people in your community? There should be 1 or 2. There should be somebody willing to look the staffer or the elected official in the eye and say, will you oppose the TPP? And then sit there and wait until they answer. And then there's going to be your educator, the person who knows the facts. And you're also going to want to have someone that's going to act as a secretary. Maybe they don't want a speaking role. They can take notes about what's said and make sure that you've got the business card of the staffer that you meet with. Now, your meetings are probably going to be 2, 4, 6, 9, about 15 minutes long. If you're in there more than 15 minutes, you're either making a date or you've got an incredibly engaged staffer. These meetings can go fairly quickly. The introduction should be about 2 minutes. And then you immediately want to get into why we're here. If you're presenting petitions or letting them know how many people oppose the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and you want to present your basic facts, that's going to be another 2 minutes. If you've got a storyteller, you're going to tell your story, and then you're going to get to the reason you're in their office. Are they supporting the TPP or are they opposing the TPP? That's what you want to know. And then whatever the answer is, you're going to wrap up, say thank you, and then head out into the hall or your car and get those notes written down while it's fresh in your mind. Whoever makes the ask, it needs to be straight to the point. In sales, it's called closing. You ask the closing question, and then you're silent, and you wait for the answer. If there is a yes, then the next question is, that's really great. We're glad that you oppose this. Is there another member that you might be able to sweat? If the answer is no, why is it no? And what would it take to turn that no into a yes? And then finally, a follow-up. The goal when you go to a congressional office is that this is not going to be your last visit. This is probably going to be your first visit because there's going to be other votes on other issues that you're going to care very strongly about. You want to set up a relationship. Send a thank you note. You want to build support, and then always have adequate research before you go into the next meeting and make sure you keep the relationship alive. I have a Tea Party representative, but he is always glad to see me because the one thing we agree on is our total opposition to the TPP. And then we're going to ask one more thing. Like Margaret said, we like to collect the stories. So take a picture. You can send it to judy@tdamerica.org. She collects these. Or if you would rather just fill out a little form, we've got a delivery form. And that delivery form will be on the February letter drop page. You can download your letter there. You can book your event there. You can get the form there that says, hey, I delivered my letter, and this is what happened. And then here's a photograph of several members of Congress with Mr. Trump of the AFL-CIO opposing the TPP. So we do have some very, very, very strong stalwarts who oppose the TPP, and they periodically will do press conferences or various other public events to let the press and their constituents know that they oppose the TPP and why they oppose it. All right, I'm going to bring up Celeste and the AFL-CIO, Chief Trade and Globalization Policy Specialist. And Celeste, I'm going to ask you to take 2 seconds and talk about the image that is the background on this presentation. I know you recognize them.
I'm sorry, the image that's the background on the what?
On the PowerPoint, the image on the background on the PowerPoint.
Which, on the slide that's showing right now? What's the?
Yes, the background images.
Oh, it's very hard for me to see.
It's your press conference. Those are all the boxes with the petitions in them.
Oh, okay. For some reason, it's coming down as almost pure white. Okay. So, yeah, I guess technically the day before the signing, but it was the day of the signing in New Zealand, There was a press conference with President Trump of the AFL-CIO. 5 members of Congress more kept pouring in because they wanted to participate. Rosa DeLauro, Tulsi Gabbard, Louise Slaughter, I can't remember who else joined us. Ben Wickler from Move On. There we go.
Debbie Dingle.
Yes, Debbie Dingle. And from Sierra Club. And they each talked about why the signing was a mistake, why Congress should reject the TPP if it gets sent up, and showed that, through a combination of all these organizations, whether it's Credo, Move On, PDA, Sierra Club, AFL-CIO, more than 1.5 million signatures against the TPP had been gathered. And I think what was great about the press conference was a really good press turnout, and all of the speakers spoke to a different reason to oppose the TPP, which is really important because it is an economic thing that's going to lose us some jobs, but that's not the only thing. It is going to affect our food safety, but that's not the only thing. I mean, that's what's so hard about it. It's great. There's a lot of things to talk about, but sometimes it's also hard because you feel like you're just throwing all the spaghetti against the wall and you don't know what's going to stick for each person. But, I think it really finished up with a really strong point, which was, look, in the end, you can talk about how all of this is, supposedly somehow for national security, and that's great. But if you're hollowing out America's manufacturing, and if you're making enemies out of people in these other countries who don't want ISDS and more expensive medicines and things like this shoved down their throats, it's actually making us weaker, and it's making us less safe. So let's stop talking about this as somehow some big national security thing, because in the end, we're making the U.S. weaker. And I think that was a big deal because the administration is right now, as every administration does, when they start feeling like they're losing on the economic arguments, they turn to the national security argument. So that was that. The U.S. ITC had a hearing January 13th through 15th. There were 63 witnesses, the vast majority of representing businesses, each with their own little slice about, well, we're date exporters. Tariffs have gone down on dates, so we should be for the U.S. ITC. Very few had a holistic view, like I did and others on my panel, that said we've looked at all the chapters, and when you add it up, look, there are going to be benefits for a few. You can't pretend there won't be benefits for some narrow interests, but the deficits far outweigh the benefits, and we really need you to look at this. And the U.S. ITC has never done a report that says a trade agreement is going to be bad for America, and it's because, A, there's obviously bias inherent in the system, but B, they use a model that will not allow them to produce that report. The model they use is called, you don't need to know all this, but it's called the computable general equilibrium model. It's an economic model that basically, the way it's constructed, once you feed in all the economic data and then you feed in all the tariff cuts, it produces an economic growth result. It can't produce any other kind of result because of the way it's constructed. So a lot of what we were talking about is you need to look at other things, and you need to look at income distribution, and you need to look at wages, and you need to look at, what's happening with deregulation and how that can be a social welfare loss instead of just assuming it will be a gain. So whether or not they change their model, we want to flood them with comments from people that agree with us that say your old way is not good enough. And so the final opportunity to comment to the U.S. ITC is tomorrow at 5:15 p.m. sharp. They will cut off their new comments that they will count. And you can comment either directly by going to the U.S. ITC site, or you can sign one of 2 or 3 petitions that I know are out there. One is from the AFL-CIO, and I put it in the chat box earlier.
Adam put up the link to the CWA petition. In fact, you could sign all of them. And then I believe CTC is doing its own petition. And we will gather our signatures at some point tomorrow and load them up, all of them, into. And I know for the AFL-CIO, last time I checked, we had over 8,000. So hopefully we will have a significant amount more. And other than that, we are the labor. We are meeting with members of Congress, just like everything that was talked about, and we just encourage you to keep going and keep fighting, and we will do our best to follow events here in D.C. and keep you informed when we know more about when and if there will be a vote. You will know as soon as we know. And the deadline time zone, I see that question in the chat box, Eastern time, so 5:15 p.m. Eastern time.
Thank you, Celeste. Thank you so very, very much. All right, now, Adam Weissman is going to bring it home. Adam Weissman is another leader on our call planning team. He's with TradeJustice and Global Justice for Animals and the Environment. Adam is going to walk us through some events, some news stories, and our upcoming plan call. Adam, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Andrea. Okay, and as always, the news stories that I'm able to tell you about are just a tiny fraction of the news stories of the week. So to find out, to see more news stories, as well as to be actually able to follow these headlines, go to tradejustice.net/news. So some of the major news in the last 2 weeks, the UN Human Rights Commission, prior to the TPP signing, urged TPP member countries or potential member countries not to sign TPP without committing to human rights and development. That obviously didn't happen, but it's a pretty strong statement that they felt that it needed to happen. Subsequent to the passage of TPP, Indonesia is amending laws in preparation for joining TPP. Indonesia is one of several countries that is interested in being added to TPP, and we're already hearing talk that the TPP member countries, now that TPP has been signed, are looking again at adding new countries to the agreement, which of course they can do since this is a docking agreement. President Obama is expected to promote TPP and independence from China when meeting with Southeast Asian leaders. This again plays into the geopolitical argument for TPP, that TPP is about preventing China from setting the rules of the road and is about the overall agenda of the Asia-Pacific pivot and not having China as the dominant power in the region. The National Farmers Union is hoping Congress will oppose TPP. There's an article about that in Crop Protection News. And encouragingly, Speaker Ryan at this point feels that there are not enough votes for the TPP deal. We know, of course, that at the point that they have the votes, they are likely to move this legislation as soon as possible, as soon as members are willing to vote on it, of course, which they probably won't be before the election. But that's encouraging news that Ryan is being so public about the lack of votes at this point, even if there may be political agendas behind him saying that. Next slide. Okay, these calls do not come out of thin air. They're planned, organized, and promoted by volunteers, people just like you. In order to make these calls successful, we need volunteers to help plan them. We need people to help book speakers. We need people to plan the agendas for these calls, to put together the slides, to come up with topics. There's lots of work to be done, and if you would like to be part of the team planning these calls, we hold weekly planning calls, and you're welcome to join us. You go to tradejustice.net/plan213 to let us know when you're available. Fill out a scheduling poll to join our next planning call. Similarly, we have a team of volunteers who works on promoting these calls, getting the word out about them, letting organizations who would potentially be interested know about them so they can publicize them to their members, promoting them on social media. And you can be part of that team as well. We have a scheduling poll for that team also for our weekly-ish meetings. And to get to that poll, it's tradejustice.net/promo, PROMO 213. Next slide. Great. Okay, a few events in the New York metropolitan area this week against TPP. Keeping with the Valentine theme we heard about earlier, there's a breakup with the TPP dance ride taking place in New York City tomorrow. It's a dance bicycle ride on the theme of breaking up with the TPP. People are going to be passing out anti-TPP Valentines. And if you'd like to find out more about this event, which meets at the main branch of the New York Public Library on 5th Avenue between 42nd Street and 40th Street, that's at 3 p.m. You can email Brennan at Brennan Kavanaugh. That's BRENNAN at BRENNAN Kavanaugh, CAVANAUGH.com if you have any questions. Also, throughout the week, we are going to be, activists in the New York metropolitan area are going to be doing visits to our local congressional offices with exactly the strategy that was outlined before, doing drop-in visits for this February recess, and then doing scheduled meetings in the March recess. I know, for example, people already have meetings planned both in the southern and northern district offices of Representative Scott Garrett in District 5 of New Jersey. There's a meeting planned with Congressman Nadler, who is a friend, but also should certainly hear that his constituents are friend on TPP, but should hear that his constituents are concerned about this issue. And we're going to be announcing many other meetings, but also if you would like to schedule a meeting in the New York metropolitan area, we'd love to talk to you. We can provide you with materials on how TPP will affect New York and how New York elected officials, including the New York City Council and many members of Congress, have come out against the TPP. So if you would like to be part of or plan a drop-in visit in New York or New Jersey this week, you can email me at adam@tradejustice.net, and I will either connect you with activists in your district or give you the resources to bring to your visit. Next slide, please. Okay, our next two upcoming calls. This on Sunday, the 21st, we're going to be having a call looking at TPP militarism and Obama's Pacific pivot. It's a topic we've addressed before, but we're going to be having two speakers, Jan Weinberg from Show Up America, who's going to talk about some of the military contractors who are pushing and stand to benefit from this agreement, as well as Arne Saiki who's from Maunanui in Hawaii, who's going to be talking about the geopolitics of TPP and the Pacific pivot and the imperialist agenda behind this trade deal. So that's our call on the 21st. Then on the 28th, we're going to be having David Korten, who's a very well-known author, a longtime figure in the movement against corporate globalization, as well as the author of When Corporations Rule the World. People may know him in connection with Yes Magazine, and he's going to be speaking on the 28th. That would be last call of February. And to register for these calls, you can go to tradejustice.net/callreg, CALLREG, or if you get emails from Harriet or Andrea, you can register through the forms that they'll be sending you. And so so hope you can join us for those calls, folks. Have a great week.
And again, I want to thank everybody for joining us. And I'm going to wish you all a happy Valentine's Day. I know here on the West Coast, there's still actually something of Valentine's Day evening left. So off you go. In about 10 minutes, when I'm able to clear the call board, I will be posting the link to the recording of the call on our website in our February 14th folder.
Oh, one more thing. I almost forgot, Andrea. Before we close. I wanted to mention that, I apologize, Citizens Trade Campaign, who of course we heard from earlier in the call, is having a conference call this Wednesday about the economic impacts of about the potential economic impacts of TPP. And if people want to register for that call, that's with Dean Baker of the Center for Economic and Policy Research. You can go to, bear with me, I'm pulling the link right now. Copy location. There's a short link, so it opens to the big link when I click on it. That's the problem. Okay, so but I want to give people a short link. Short link is TP. Why is it not putting the short link? Sorry, I will post it in the chat box.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Thanks, Adam.
That's why I have all my windows open and I just pop back and forth and copy the links out. And then as I use them, I get to close the windows. There we are. Oh, right.
tinyurl.com/TPP calls, all lowercase for those of you in audio only. tinyurl.com/TPP calls. Sorry about that.
Excellent, excellent. So again,
that's this Wednesday.
Thanks to our very, very, very wonderful, wonderful speakers, to Dr. Bill Rosenberg, and to Elizabeth Swager, and our wonderful call planning team. Thank you all so very much. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Yeah. Good night, everyone. See you in a little bit. Just next week. Bye.
Have a great week, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.